time, 1984. Most of us in this room understand that it was a time in our church. Father was on his way to prison, and Yochanan, his eldest son, was going through many things. And I remember the words, like a wild bird of prey, like a thief in the night. You can take what you want and you don't think twice, because the world's in your hands and you've got all you want and you won't change a thing. You're the lucky one. And I used to think somehow Yochanan, no matter what he seems to do, he's the lucky one. Why? What is it? What is it about Father's family, or what is it about us? Why are we are the lucky ones? But the problem is we don't realize it. So I want to talk today about this is the very last part of Matthew 5. This is where Jesus speaks about, he gives the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. And the very, very last thing he talks about is the topic of loving your enemy. He says, "You've heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that?" And then this is the very famous verse, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." So loving the enemy, what does it really mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you. I want true parents, true father to explain it. And he explained it very clearly in this very important speech. World unification and North and South unification will be accomplished by true love. The Father starts by saying, "Distinguished guests whose fervent desire is for North-South unification." This is February 2000. The new millennium that just began is a time to clean away the divisions and conflicts of the past century and to manifest the ideal of a one-world family of harmony and unification. I would like to begin by thanking you for congratulating me on my 80th birthday. Most of all, I would like to return to God all the honor and glory given to me, because it is He who has watched over me until this day. As I look back, I am reminded that my life has never been easy. My life has been intertwined with the suffering history of our people and the numerous difficulties that our people have undergone in the midst of the great powers. As a boy of 16, I came into contact with the will of heaven through prayer, and throughout my life after that, I have devoted all my spirit and energy to accomplishing God's will. I came to understand that the fundamental cause of human unhappiness is that the relationship with God was severed by the fall. As a result of the fall, human beings fell into a state of spiritual ignorance. In an effort to resolve the fundamental problems this has caused among humans and in the universe, I have spoken publicly on more than 10,000 occasions in many places around the world and set forth a true view of humanity, a true view of the world, and a true view of history based on Godism. Father came, Father spoke everywhere, and he gave a correct and true view of life and reality. These speeches have been translated into 12 languages and published in 300 volumes. The contents of these speeches are not the result of a comprehensive study of historical documents. My conclusions are not the result of scholarly research. Instead, I arrived at these answers to basic and fundamental questions through my communications with both the visible and invisible worlds. Reverend Moon, very unique person. He discovered these things by direct experience with God, with Jesus, with spiritual world and the physical world. He studied electrical engineering, he studied science, everything. And then Father came to understand these deep truths. The issue of unifying the Korean Peninsula is the solemn desire of our people and the final act of bringing the global Cold War to a conclusion. So today, as I express my gratitude for your having prepared this meaningful forum, I would like to share with you on the topic North-South unification and world unification will be accomplished by true love, and lay out the basic answer for how to bring about unification. You know, we who have been here a long time, I don't know about you, but I constantly ponder and reflect and think, my God, North Korea, still, after all these years, what has changed in North Korea? It seems like nothing has changed. It's the same, whatever you want to call it, the same strange, bizarre place. And yet it is the half of the nation that was chosen by God to give birth to the Messiah. And I think sometimes, why? How all these years it just stays the same way? I think we can come to a conclusion and an answer to that. But one thing I realized recently, I had this kind of inspiration or revelation. You know, if you cut yourself and you damage your body, then it starts to heal. But when it heals, it first starts to heal on the inside. And it heals on the inside, and then if you notice, the very, very last part of your body that's going to heal is the scab. It's on the very outside. And based on Father's teachings, if we really understand the significance of North Korea is like that scab on the very outside of the providence of God, or the reality of our problems. And you won't see that change until the internal corrects itself. Until we're healing the internal, then finally it'll be manifested through that one point on the surface of this earth, that place called North Korea. The unification of our country involves more than a mere unification of national territory. It begins with the unification of the human mind and body that were divided against one another as a result of the fall. And it is the model for the unification of the world that has been divided in two. Thus, this issue must be understood from the perspective of God's salvation providence. It must be resolved on a providential level. Salvation, restoration, recreation. Father's introducing religious terms. Human history is the history of the providence of restoration through indemnity, which is purposed to restore the original world that was lost due to the fall of the first ancestors. Therefore, it is a history of the struggle between good and evil taking place, between Satan's side and God's side. The goal of God's side is to realize God's ideal of creation, the purpose of creation from the beginning, before the fall took place. That's God's direct goal. In the background of history, good spirits have always supported the good side, and evil spirits have incited the evil side. The history of division that began through the human fall has expanded in scope to the levels of family, tribe, people, nations, and world. Now it is being manifested as the fight between materialism and theism. What is this materialism and theism? Who is a materialist? Who is a theist? Very simply speaking, a theist is a person who has some sense that there's something more to this world than what we see. A theist is a person who has some respect for the spiritual dimension. A religious person is a theist person, because a religious person believes there's an invisible God, a creator. A religious person or a spiritual person believes that the spiritual phenomena and spiritual reality is to be taken seriously, to be respected. It doesn't mean a theist doesn't necessarily understand the details of why or how, but they respect the concept of divinity. They respect the idea that there's something to this world more than what we see. A materialist person is a person who lets the physical side of life become subjective. They're more likely to act in an unprincipled way, because for them it's the survival of the fittest. It's economics, it's politics, it's science, it's do the math. It's evolution. Only the strong survive. A materialistic-minded person is a person who tends to not respect spirit. They become anti-religious, anti-Christian, or anti-God to a certain extent. Or, at the very least, they really doubt. When someone starts to talk about something spiritual, oh, here we go again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They tend to think in a different way, on a different frame. So they're focused on the body, on the physical. Whereas a theistic person is respecting the spiritual. We see this division. This division is taking place all over the world now. If 2,000 years ago the people had accepted Jesus, he would have brought together Judaism and the people of that tradition, and then worked with them to unite the parts of the Levant inhabited by the descendants of Jacob's 12 tribes. They would have then propagated Jesus' teachings throughout the Middle East region and to the Indian subcontinent, all the way to the Far East. So the first change that would have taken place would be based on Jesus' teaching, the internal. Internally, Jesus would have been able to influence his own people, the Jews, and then they would have influenced people who were more open to spiritual truth. It would have the East, the Eastern way. At the same time, Jesus' teachings would have won the heart of the Roman Empire and Europe. In this way, Jesus would have realized one united world during his lifetime. As the center of this new religious and cultural realm, Jesus would have become the King of Kings. So also Rome, which was very materialistic, would have been influenced. And so the material side and the spiritual side would have eventually been united. Tragically, he died on the cross. Rome had already developed its central culture based on Hellenism, an externally oriented humanistic culture centered on the physical body. Christianity, in contrast, was a theistic culture grounded in Hebraism, an internally oriented culture that centered on the mind. It suffered persecution from Rome and its Hellenistic culture for 400 years. This is the division that we all face. Now, suddenly, Father starts talking very directly about Satan. Satan. What is Satan's ultimate target? Behind the history of struggle between good and evil, ever since the fall of the first human ancestors launched this conflict, Satan has had his sights set on God himself. God is eternal, unchanging, absolute, and unique, and the standard of the ideal that he has held to since the beginning of creation must also have these qualities. If you ask God directly, I think he will confirm what I am saying. Satan, a spiritual being, an enemy of God, trying to take over and control God himself. When people hear something like this, it's like, what are you talking about? God is God. He's the creator of everything. How could Satan, no matter how you define him, how could he even consider taking over the position of God or having dominion over God? But when we study the purpose of creation and why God created human beings and how God created for us to become subjects with him, centered on true love, and we understand about the archangel and how the archangel tried to take over the position of Adam and Eve and take control over their lives centered on false love, then he was trying to ultimately control God. How can God reply when Satan says to God, God, when you made me an archangel in the beginning, were you acting out of a love for me that was temporary or eternal? I think God will say that he made the archangel out of a love that was eternal. If he were to say that his love was temporary, that would make him an ephemeral God. Unless God maintains a standard of loving the archangel eternally, there will eventually come a time when he will no longer be able to exercise his authority as God with respect to the angel. Thus, no matter how much Satan may oppose God, God has no choice but to maintain a stance of love towards Satan. God is love. God has no evil inside of his existence. God is only true love. God is always and only giving out love. It's not even a choice that God makes. You and I, because of the fall, are in a position where you can choose, you and I can choose to be evil, to be angry, resentful, hateful. We can choose to ignore the truth. We can choose to behave in whatever way we want because we have a part of that selfish, evil nature in us. And God gave us, during the growing period, the option to think about God. He has no choice. It's never been a choice with God. Even though Father's describing this in kind of a story way, a conversation between God and Satan, what's the deeper meaning of what's really being said here? God only loves. And when God created the archangel, even though the archangel fell and became Satan, even though Adam and Eve fell, God only loves. He knows nothing else except to give love unconditionally. And therefore, God will love forever. And God knows that by the principles of his creation, that someday that love will be the power and it will bring the promise of God, and everything will be restored because of that love. Therefore, no matter what happened in history, God would never give up and stop loving. Satan says to God, I became an evil monster as a result of the fall. Yet you and good people can't use methods that are similar to mine, can you? I may like to fight, but you are not supposed to enjoy fighting. Even when you take a blow, you have to endure, don't you? God has to agree with him. Because indeed, God's philosophy is one of non-resistance. Theoretically, God obviously doesn't want to fight. But the principle of creation says that if something goes against the law and the order of the universe, eventually the universe will even come against it. So the reality is that even though God himself would never incite violence or try to do anything bad against evil, if evil pushes hard enough, there's going to be a repercussion. If someone is abused enough, eventually, by their own original nature, they're going to rise up and say, enough is enough. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction in the physical plane, in the physical world. So even evil can't unconditionally take over and control this physical world by the principle. And it doesn't mean that God encourages people to fight. It's a natural response. that good people are going to rise up and say, look, enough. True love and forgiving the enemy doesn't mean you let bad people run all over you. But true love and forgiveness means that you are the one who is trying to focus on the principal way. And you're and whatever it takes, you're maintaining a standard of true love. And in whatever circumstance you're in, you're desperately trying to maintain the same standard of God. And if we do that, God's side will always ultimately be victorious. Why is that? It is because until the world of the heavenly ideal is manifested on this earth, God has to love the archangel Satan regardless of the circumstances. No matter how much trouble Satan may cause, God cannot punish him or cut him off. He has to establish the condition of having loved Satan regardless of what Satan does. God can only have complete victory when Satan confesses to him, saying, "You truly are a God who loves me. I surrender to you." This is the problem. Because of this, God is in the position of being tied up by Satan. This was Father's life. Father discovered this core truth. And therefore, Father lived the life of suffering and sacrifice. And Father understood. He desperately prayed, "God, please, I love you, and I know you love me, and no matter what happens, I will love people. I will sacrifice for people. I will be confident that someday, somehow, we are going to see the kingdom of heaven on this earth. No matter how I am treated, no matter what happens." And so Father went into the most miserable circumstances. And instead of returning anger and resentment and hatred, doubt, fear, he absorbed, he forgave, he loved, he united, he prayed for people, he respected them, he understood them, he appreciated them, he valued them. Even the most terrible torturer in prison. Even when Father tells the story of when Korea was liberated. And the very police station where Father was tortured, the Japanese police now were running for their lives because they knew how all this hatred and anger that they had caused, that they had inflicted, was coming back to them. But under those circumstances, Father didn't want them to suffer anymore. Father forgave them. Father encouraged them. Father helped them to escape. Father showed them the way out. That's the principle of creation. That's the unconditional love of the parent. That's the power of true love. Since the principal path of the providence of restoration is for God to bring about Satan's surrender by loving him, we who are his children have to walk the same path. It doesn't matter that we are persecuted and abused and regarded by everyone around the world as an enemy. We who are God's children must establish the condition of having loved those who oppose us. That is our mission. That is our purpose. That is our reason for life. That is our goal as a blessed family. From this perspective, there is amazing truth in God's teaching, love your enemy. In fact, this is one of God's strategies in his battle against evil. These words sound simple, yet few realize that they mark the boundary line between victory and defeat in the battle between God and Satan. If God were to adopt the philosophy of looking on Satan as his enemy and seek revenge against him, then God would never be able to stand on the pinnacle of victory. Thus, God says, love your enemy, and pursues a strategy of love. The words, love your enemy, are the culmination of Jesus' teaching. Love your enemy. That's the way God explained it through Jesus 2,000 years ago. But what is the real meaning? Does God have an enemy? Ultimately? No. There's no such... Only because Satan exists can we use the word enemy. But once Satan stops existing and goes back to being the archangel, then the word enemy is wrong. There are no enemies. There's only a family. There's only a family. There's only God's children. And God's helpers or servants or supporters. The angels, the angelic world that God created for a good purpose, whom He always intended to eventually find true joy and true happiness. Once human beings become people of true love and establish a standard of true love, then that true love will be given to all the creation, including the angelic world. That's why in this day and age, now, you and I, we can't use these words anymore. I don't think we should even use the word Satan anymore. We should just explain the archangel. The Father said that He already won this. Satan has acknowledged. He's agreed that his way won't work. Said, you know what? You're right, Reverend Moon. No matter how much I pursue this way, even though I get thrills from it, because I've done this for thousands of years, you're right. I have to admit it. Ultimately, it just can't work. Because it's unprincipled. It's just not going to happen. I realize now. When you're really doing something bad, or you're really not a good person, who can you talk to about it? Can you talk to a person who considers you their enemy? Can you talk to a person who mocks you and ridicules you, who tries desperately to find fault in everything you do, accusing you day and night? Or would you go to a person who never accused you, who always seemed to forgive you, and never reacted to the way you treated them? That's the kind of person Father became. So that this archangelic being could once and for all go before Father and acknowledge and say, thank you. You're right. Damn, you're right. I was wrong. Does that mean it's easy for Satan to stop being Satan? Is it easy for bad people to stop being bad people, to get rid of our old ways? No. What's the phrase? Bad habits die. It's hard. And especially in a world that's so superficial. That's what's happening. The world is changing, though. Internally, the incredible changes are taking place. Centered on the victory of true parents. Because of true parents' victory. Now, 40 years later, 40 years after true parents came to America and went through all this country, teaching and educating, explaining the truth about Jesus, the truth about good and evil, the truth about the history of everything, the truth about the fall, and then giving the blessing, changing the lineage. We inherit true Father's victorious relationship with God. We are just like true Father. You say, oh, what are you talking about? I could never do what Father did. Are you crazy? oh no, I still have this thought and that thought. I'm still behaving this way and that way. If you think too much that way, you're thinking that way because that's the way the archangel wants you to continue thinking. But Father doesn't think that way about you or me or us or the world. Father only sees the original goodness in every person. And through the blessing, He's liberated and given that away. In conclusion, I want to read from one of Father's speeches that he gave to the Japanese. Can I bring it up here? This is called A Day When We Welcome the Blessing. This was in Japan, 1978. September 22nd. I just want to read one paragraph. In Japan, there are huge buildings. The person whose name appears on the title papers owns the building. You can become the owner of the building through just a piece of paper. For you to inherit everything from me is similar. I achieve all the victories of the restoration of the cosmos and build a wonderful building on the world level, draw up the title papers, and then transfer them to you through the blessing. It's simple, isn't it? All of you here are the owners of the building I have erected. Your position comes just like that. It is as though you are all now standing on the same starting line on an athletic field. Try to run as hard as you can. Surely the central tribe of Japan will spring from you. By ourselves, we have no value. We simply preach and try to live the principle. We simply preach and try to live the principle. Because of our inheritance, Satan can do nothing. Today, we will go through the ceremony of transferring the title papers according to the principle. This is us. This is everyone in this room. This is all of the blessed members. It's all the fathers, sons, and daughters. All of our children, our grandchildren. Nothing can take that away. It's by God's authority, true parents' authority. By their authority. Satan has no authority. Satan has nothing. The only authority Satan has, and the only reason the world continues to be a mess, is because people are choosing to ignore the truth, choosing to turn the other way and not pay attention, or refusing to acknowledge and admit maybe there's a better way. Maybe this guy, Reverend Moon, I keep seeing all these pictures of all these people being married, all at these ceremonies. Maybe there's something to that. The only thing, in the very beginning, the archangel, when he tried to seduce Eve and Adam, the one thing that he did that was unprincipled is that he was lying. He was not telling the truth. The only reason that the archangel could succeed in fooling Adam and Eve was because they chose to believe something that was not the truth. And when they started to guide their lives according to something that wasn't true, wasn't according to the principle of creation, they began to break things. Things became messed up. Things didn't work. Things didn't function reality in our world today. It's not a power that Satan has over us, but it's the fact that there is truth. There is the correct, proper understanding and explanation about God, about Jesus, about the history of restoration, about good and evil, and about how we are all one family. And because there is the truth, if we cling to that truth and make an effort to practice that in our daily life, the principle of creation, if we try to live according to the principle of creation, fulfill the 3 blessings, mind and body unity, create good families, love people unconditionally, find some way to serve the public purpose, to have dominion over creation, then God will restore this world very quickly. The world will be restored quickly. So, I want to finish by showing a happy picture of Father. This is the man that explained and taught everything to us and made all the conditions necessary. True Father and true Mother together. And then all of us in this room together. He used us for 30, 40, 50 years. He used us during his lifetime to accomplish everything with him. But in return, he gave the blessing to us. And he said, here, inherit it all. Take it all. It's yours now. Father's in the spiritual world. Mother's still here. But the principle remains the same. So why was Hyojinim the lucky one? Because nothing could ever take away his relationship with Father. Even though he behaved badly, even though he made many mistakes, and I have no idea in the spiritual world Hyojinim's situation as far as having to deal with some of the people that, he hurt some people. I used to be very afraid of Hyojinim, honestly. I was around him sometimes and I would avoid him. If he was coming, I'd leave. I'd go someplace else. I came to disrespect him because of the way he behaved. But his relationship as Father's first son never changes. Same thing with all the true family. And with us, we're eternally bound to each other, artistically and spiritually. And there's nothing anybody in this room can do to change it. Or you can start to play with things in your head, and you can start to think certain ways and conspiracy theories, whatever, and then you can go out and create a group of people that think in a like-minded way that you do, and you could create your own group out there and do stuff, but in the end, ultimately, the center of God's providence is people centered on true love. True love, as true parents teach. So with that, I just would like to close. Please join me in a short prayer.